Ada Kessler is 44, and she sleeps on a folding cot in the pantry off her own kitchen. Her 3 dresses are folded in a flower crate. She did not cry the summer they moved her there. She carried the cotton herself, so no one else would have to. For 11 years, every time a soul asked Ada a question, her brother Walter answered first. "She's needed here." He said it before she could draw a breath. 11 summers she cooked the threshing dinner. 480 times she fed that crew. And not one man at those long tables ever once said her name. Then this July, in the worst heat any of them had lived through, at 10 minutes past noon, the widower who farms the next section set his plate down in front of 22 threshers and both her sisters-in-law. And he said her name out loud. What he said next, he said where her brother could not answer for her. If your family decided what you wanted so many times that you stopped keeping an answer ready, this story is for you. Before we go on, subscribe so you're here when the rest of these stories find you. And do one thing for me. Comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far Ada's story travels. Now, let me take you to Kansas. It was Hesper in Barton County, and it was July of 1934. The wheat stood gold and dying at the same time. That is the thing nobody tells you about a drought. It doesn't come like a fist. It comes like a slow forgetting. The heads fill light. The straw goes brittle. The whole field turns the color a man wants and then dies inside that color. So that from the road, it looks like the best year of your life, and up close, it is the worst. Ada was up at 4. She was always up at 4 in threshing season. You start the range before the heat, or the heat starts you, and by 6 the kitchen is a box of iron and fire you cannot stand inside. So she came down in the dark. She struck the match. She fed the firebox stick by stick, the way her mother had taught her, the way her mother's mother must have taught her mother. She did not light the lamp. She knew the room by her hands. She knew the whole house by her hands. She ought to. She was born in the front bedroom. She had nursed her mother in it and, 3 winters later, her father. Both of them went slow. Both of them went hard. And Ada was the one who stayed. Her brothers came to visit and left before dark. Ada emptied the pans. Ada turned the bodies so the sores wouldn't take. Ada sat up the long nights when the breathing changed. And she was the one holding the hand each time the hand went still. There was a will. Her father made it quiet, the way he did most things. He had a man from Great Bend come out, and they sat at the kitchen table, and afterward the paper went into the tin box on the top shelf of the pantry, behind the vinegar. It left the farm to Ada. To Ada, who stayed. Her father said it plain to the lawyer, and the lawyer wrote it plain, and then the tin box closed on it, and the years closed over it, and after 1929, nobody in that house said it out loud again. Not the will. Not whose name was on the ground they all ate from. It became one of those true things a family keeps in a box and stops opening. Until they half believe it isn't there. Ada believed it was there. She just never took it down. By the time the sky went gray, she had the coffee going, and a full pan of biscuits in, and the side meat sliced. She kept the accounts nobody had asked her to keep. A ledger in a school hand, every hen and every quart, what the eggs brought in town, what the seed cost. The whole running arithmetic of a farm that would have gone under 3 winters back if somebody hadn't been counting. She canned. She had 200 jars down cellar in a drought year. Green beans and tomatoes and the peaches she put up from the vote trees, the autumn Marta vote, was still alive to trade for them. She was the reason the Kessler place still ate well, when half the county was eating cornmeal and calling it supper. She was the reason, and she knew she was the reason, and she said nothing about it, because saying it was not the kind of thing you did. She was competent to her bones. Remember that. Before you pity her, love her. She was not a small woman. She was not a broken one. She was the strongest thing on that quarter section, and that is exactly why what they did to her is a horror. You cannot fold a weak woman into a pantry. She wouldn't hold the shape. It takes a strong one, folded on purpose, a little at a time. to make it look like nothing happened at all. So let me tell you how nothing happened at all. It started in 1923. That was the summer Irene came. Walter had married her the winter before, and she arrived in July, heavy with the third child, 2 already at her skirts, and a third pushing the seams. And there was, everyone agreed, the question of the babies. Where do you put babies? You put them where there's room and where a mother can hear them in the night. You put them in the front bedroom. It made sense for the babies. Everyone said so, and it was true. That was the awful part. It was perfectly true. Ada moved to the sewing room. She did it herself in an afternoon. Carried her things down the hall while Irene rested. It wasn't a demotion. Nobody framed it that way. It was a kindness to a tired woman with a full belly and 2 at her hem. Ada told herself she'd take the sewing room until the baby came and things settled, and then the baby came and things did not settle, because that is not how babies work, and the sewing room had become simply where Ada slept. The 4th child came in 1925. By then the sewing room was wanted too, for a sick child, for storage, for the endless overflow of a growing family in a shrinking house. And there was the pantry. The pantry was off the kitchen, and Ada was in the kitchen before anyone and after everyone, so in a way it was practical. That was the word. Practical. Somebody set a folding cot up against the flour bins. And it might even have been Ada who said it, and her dresses went into an empty crate that had held 48 pounds of flour and still wore the stamp on the side. Occident flour. Red letters. She folded 3 dresses into it. The gray, the brown, and the good dark one for church and for burying. And that crate became her wardrobe, and the cot became her bed, and the pantry became her room. Here is the thing I need you to sit with. No one ever decided it. There was no night anyone said, Ada, we're moving you to the pantry now. There was no cruelty you could point at and name. It was a series of reasonable afternoons. Each one made sense by itself. Each one was kind, even, and at the end of them a grown woman slept on a cot beside the flour bins in the house her father left to her. And everyone had been so reasonable, every single step of the way, that no one could find the place where the wrong had happened. That is the horror. Not a monster. A series of reasonable afternoons. She stopped being Ada around the same time. Not to herself. In the world. At the tables, at the church, in the yard on ring day, she became the cook. She became your sister. That was Walter's word for her when he was talking to other men. Your sister, as if she were a fact of his household, and not a person standing 4 feet away with flour to her elbows. She became she. Somebody would come through the gate and ask after the family, and Walter would run down the list. Irene and the young ones and Roy's bunch. And then, if he mentioned Ada at all, it was, she keeps us fed. The Grange men thanked Walter for the dinner. Think about that. They stood up from tables Ada had cooked at since before some of them shaved, and they turned to Walter, and they thanked Walter, and Walter took it. He took it easy, the way you take a thing that has always been yours. One time a man had said something like her name. It was last year's threshing. The widower from the next section, Elias Vogt, had come with the ring, and at the end of the meal he'd carried his own plate to the wash tub. His own plate. 22 men at those tables, and every one of them left his plate where it fell, greasy for the women to gather, and Elias Vogt stood up and carried his to the tub and set it down clean. And when Ada came by with the pan he'd said, "Quiet. Much obliged, ma'am." That was all. Much obliged, ma'am. It wasn't her name. But it was aimed at her, at Ada, and not at Walter. And it landed somewhere she didn't have a place to put. She noted it the way you note weather. Rain coming. A cold snap. A man who carried his own plate. Filed and forgotten. Or she thought forgotten. She did not know yet that some weather takes a year to arrive. Now, this July. The ring came back around to the Kessler place first. Threshing is a shared thing on the plains, or it was then. A ring of neighbors, 10 or 12 farms, And they went place to place with the separator and the crew, and everyone worked everyone's harvest in turn, and the women fed whoever's yard the machine sat in that day. When the case separator pulled into the Kessler yard that morning, it meant Ada was cooking for the whole ring. 22 men. She'd known the count for a week. She'd been putting food by for a week. And she was ready, because she was always ready. The machine came on at sunup. If you have never heard a threshing separator run, I want you to imagine a sound with weight to it, a great roaring animal of belts and gears eating bundles whole, and the men pitching to it steady all morning, and the chaff rising off it in a golden, filthy cloud that got in your teeth and your collar and the corners of your eyes. Dust everywhere, heat coming off the machine, on top of the heat coming off the sky. And in the middle of it, calm as a stove oughta, moving between the kitchen and the long tables they'd set up under the one big cottonwood, laying out a dinner for 22 men in weather that would kill a dog. And it was there, mid-morning, in the noise and the dust, that the whole county got to watch it happen and think nothing of it. A Grange officer had come by, a decent man, older, one of the ones who ran the county fair committee. He'd tasted her bread at some church supper, and not forgotten it. He crossed the yard to where Ada stood at a table with her sleeves shoved up, and he said it kindly, he meant it as an honor. He said, "Miss Kessler, you ought to put your bread in at the fair this August. That white loaf, I'd stake it against any in Barton County." And for 1/2 of 1 second there was a question in the air, aimed at Ada, and it had her name on it, Miss Kessler. And she opened her mouth. "She's needed here in August," Walter said. He wasn't even close. He was 20 feet off, by the machine, and he heard his sister ask a question, and he crossed the distance with his voice before she could use hers. "She's needed here in August," he said. Easy. Friendly. A man sharing a small fact with another man. Harvest and canning both. She wouldn't want the fuss, anyhow, but I'll tell her you said so. And the Grange officer nodded, because it was reasonable, and tipped his hat to the general air, and went back toward the machine, and the moment closed over like water. Ada's hands did not stop. That's the picture I want to leave with you. 22 men. The case separator roaring. The dust in a gold cloud. The long tables. A woman answered for in front of her whole world. And her hands not stopping, laying the forks. Because to a body that has done a thing 400 times, the doing does not need the mind. And her mind had gone very quiet and very far away to a place it kept for exactly this. Nobody saw a thing happen. A woman was asked a question, and her brother answered it, and the day rolled on. And if you had been standing in that yard, you would not have seen a wrong done. You would have seen a helpful man, and that is precisely how 11 years go by. Because it had happened before. It had happened so many times. Let me give you 3 of them. Quick. The way they came back to her later, braided together. One bleeding into the next. 1925. The schoolteacher. A young man, new to the district, who had a way of finding reasons to come by, and who one Sunday screwed his courage up on the front step and asked Walter, mind, because that was how it was done. You asked the man of the house whether he might call on Ada proper. And Walter said, kind as anything, she's got the folks to see to. And that was true. Their father was 3 months from dying that spring. She had the folks to see to. So she let it stand. Because how do you contradict a true thing? And the schoolteacher took a position in Ellsworth the next fall and married a girl from there. 1930. The seed man. Older, a widower himself, steady, with a good quarter over by Claflin. He came around 3 times that winter, and then he sat in the front room and put it to Walter square, that he'd like to speak to Ada about the future. And Walter said, she's not looking to leave. Just that. She's not looking to leave. And Ada was in the kitchen with the door open and she heard it, and she waited to hear her own voice come out and say something. And it didn't. And the seed man went home and married a widow from Claflin inside the year. Each time she let it stand. You want to know why? You're sitting there wanting to shake her. And I understand it, and I'm going to tell you the truth. Because the truth is the whole of this story. She let it stand because to contradict Walter in his own house, in front of another man, would have cost her the pantry. Think it through the way she thought it through, 4 in the morning staring at the flour bins. The house was hers. On paper, in the tin box, behind the vinegar, the house was hers. But paper is a thing you have to be willing to take down and open and read out loud in front of people. And reading it out loud meant a fight. And a fight meant Walter's face, and Irene's face, and the 4 children looking. And where would she go while it all came apart? A 40-year-old woman with 3 dresses and no husband, and no other roof. She had a place. It was a cot by the flour. But it was a place. And it was the only one, and every time she thought about opening the box, she thought about the cot. And she closed her mouth. So she stopped opening her mouth. And here is the key I want to turn. So listen close, because this is the whole hinge of her. She did not stop wanting. That's what people get wrong about a woman like Ada. They think the wanting went out of her. It didn't. She wanted a room with a window. She wanted a man to say her name across a table. She wanted, God help her, to enter her bread at the fair and stand there while a judge cut a slice of something she made and see her own name on a blue card. The wanting never left. What left was the answer. She stopped keeping an answer ready. When you are answered for enough times, you quit loading the words, because words you never fire just sit in your chest and rot, and it hurts less not to load them. That's all. She stopped keeping an answer ready. 11 years of not keeping one ready, until the muscle that makes an answer had gone soft as a hand that never grips. Her family never once saw this. Not one of them. To Walter, he was a good brother taking care of a sister who wasn't the marrying kind, who was honestly happy or busy, who wouldn't want the fuss. He believed it. That's the thing you have to swallow. He was not lying to those men. He believed she wouldn't want to. He had said she wouldn't want to so many times that it had become, for him, simply the truth about his sister. And he'd have been genuinely surprised, maybe even hurt, to hear it called anything but kindness. But somebody saw. Across the yard, that ring day, while the officer walked off and Ada laid the forks, a man was watching the whole thing. Elias Vogt was 51 that summer, and he had been alone 6 years. Marta had died in 28. Quick, a fever, no children left behind to fill the house. And he had a front bedroom on the next section with a bed in it that only held 1. And he ate every meal of his life alone at a table set for 2, out of a habit he couldn't break. He had come back from the war in France a quiet man, and got quieter, and he farmed well and kept to himself, and the county thought of him, when it thought of him at all, as a decent fellow who'd had a hard turn. He had understood something about that kitchen that none of the Kesslers ever had. He had figured it out slow, across years of ring days watching, and it came down to one thing. One small thing that once you see it, you cannot stop seeing. In 11 years, at all those tables, at every dinner that woman had cooked and carried and cleared, no one had ever asked Ada to sit down. That was it. That was the whole of what he saw. 22 men would eat until they were slow and stupid with it, and lean back and pick their teeth, and the women would eat after, standing, in the kitchen, from the pots, and Ada, who cooked it all, ate last of all, and standing, and alone, and no one, not once, in all those years, had pulled out a chair and said, "Ada, sit, you've done enough. Sit down and let me bring you a plate." He noticed. He had been noticing for years. And he had done nothing, and he told himself the doing nothing was patience, was respect, was waiting for the right time. He didn't yet know he'd tell himself a harder thing later, that while he called it patience, she'd been drowning, quiet, in plain sight, one reasonable afternoon at a time, and he'd stood on the bank of it and admired how well she swam. But this year, he'd started to do things, small things, careful things. Back in June, At the Grange meeting where the ring set the rotation, which farm the machine hit and when, Elias Vogt had spoken up, which he rarely did, and asked in his quiet way that his own outfit run alongside when the ring did the Kessler place. His team, his rack at the Kessler harvest. He made it sound like nothing. Made it sound like neighborliness. Two places close together, easier to work them the same days. The men nodded and wrote it down. And when word got around to Ada that Vogt would be threshing at their elbow this year, she thought only, that's neighborly of him, and put another dozen jars by for the extra plates. She assumed the plain thing. Why wouldn't she? Nobody had aimed anything at Ada in so long that she'd forgotten how to feel it coming. He was there the morning the officer asked about the fare. He saw Walter cross the yard with his voice. He saw the hands not stop. And he watched something else. Later, that same day, that put the last piece in. It was after the dinner. The men had gone back to the machine, sluggish and full, and the yard had that heavy afternoon quiet under the roar of the separator starting up again. Elias had hung back. He'd forgotten his water jug, or said he had, and through the kitchen doorway, he watched Ada Kessler feed herself. She stood at the stove. There was a pot on the back of it, the scrape pot, where the leavings went, the crusts and the ends, and the last of the beans gone cool and thick. She ate from that. Standing, a fork straight from the pot to her mouth. Quick. The way you eat when eating is a thing you steal between two chores, and not a thing you're allowed to sit down to. 22 men had eaten her food off plates at a laid table, under a tree. And the woman who made it ate the scrapings on her feet by the stove. And she did it without any sorrow on her face at all, without any sense that it was strange, because it had been 11 years and it wasn't strange to her anymore. That was the part that got him. Not that she suffered it. That she'd stopped knowing it was a thing to suffer. Elias Vogt said nothing. He stood in the doorway, with his hat in his hand and his water jug forgotten, and he watched her eat standing from the scrape pot, and he said not one word. But his jaw did something, a working, at the hinge, the thing a man's jaw does when he is holding a great deal behind his teeth, and holding it hard. He turned and went back to the machine, and he pitched bundles the rest of that afternoon like a man half his age, savage and steady, and the men said Vogt's got his wind up today, and left it at that. He had made up his mind. But he had not yet made his plan, and I'm going to leave him there, at the machine, with his jaw working. Because something happened at the next ring dinner that even he didn't cause. And it happened inside Ada. And it is the first crack of light in 11 dark years. It was noon, a few days on. The ring had moved and come back around, the way it does. And there were the tables again under the cottonwood, and there was Ada laying them for the crew. She'd set them 1,000 times, 22 places. She could do it in her sleep, and half the time felt like she did. Plate, fork, knife, cup, down the long boards, 22 of them, the exact same as always. And then her hands did a thing her mind had not told them to do. At the far end of the second table, past the last man's place, in the spot where the board ran out and there was nothing but bare wood and the shade of the tree, Ada set one more place. A plate. A fork laid beside it, square and clean. A glass, and she filled the glass from the good tea. The sweet tea she made with the last of the ice from the ice house. The tea that was for the men who worked, and not for the women who served. She set it down, all of it, a full place at the empty end of the table, and she stood back and looked at it, and she could not have told you why she did it. She had no name for who it was for. She only knew, in some place, under the place where words are, that today there was going to be one more. Irene saw it from the kitchen steps. Irene, who ran the front bedroom now, who kept the order, who had never once in 11 years counted Ada's hours. Irene came out with a bowl on her hip and saw the extra place at the end of the table. The plate and the fork and the good tea sweating in the heat. And she stopped. and she frowned, and she said, "Ada, who's that for?" And Ada Kessler, 44 years old, keeper of a house that was hers and no one's, cooked to 480 threshing dinners. A woman who had not made one unbidden choice in front of another living soul since the summer of 1923, Ada opened her mouth to answer. And found she had one. She didn't say it. Not yet. She stood there with the answer new and strange in her mouth, like a tooth come in crooked, and she did not sit down in the extra place. And she did not tell Irene who it was for, because she didn't have the name yet, she only had the certainty. But the muscle had moved. 11 years soft, and it had gripped, just once, just barely, over a fork and a glass of tea at the empty end of a table. Out past the yard, the dust was rising gold off the road. A team was coming. His own outfit, running alongside, the way he'd asked for it in June. 10 minutes to noon, and the widower from the next section was pulling into the Kessler yard with his hat down against the sun and something set behind his teeth that he had been holding for 6 years. And Ada stood by a place she had set for a man she would not let herself name. And the answer she had stopped keeping ready for 11 years sat loaded, at last, in her chest. She just didn't know yet what he was going to ask. The team came on slow. Elias Vogt sat the wagon easy, the way a man sits who has driven the same road 10,000 times. And he brought it in past the gate and swung it wide of the tables and set the brake. His own outfit. His own horses. He had asked for it in June, and here it was, running alongside the Kessler harvest, and every man in the yard read it as neighborliness, because that is what it looked like. Walter came across the stubble, wiping his hands. "Elias," he said, "glad of the help. This heat." "This heat," Elias agreed, and that was all. 2 men in a dying wheat ear, saying the one word that stood in for everything. The wheat was gold and finished at once. You could see it, standing tall and burnt from the inside, the way a thing looks whole, right up until you touch it. Barton County had not had a rain worth the name since spring, and every farmer in the ring knew what his own field was worth now, which was less than the note against it. Walter knew what his was worth. $600 at the bank in Great Bend, due when the harvest came in, and the harvest was coming in light. He had signed it in the winter when the wheat still looked like money. He had signed it in his own hand at his own kitchen table in the house that had come down to his sister on their father's will, and he had not thought about that once, because he never did. The house ran. The dinners came. 200 jars stood in the pantry cellar where Ada had put them up, and the crew ate well even in a burnt year. And Walter's standing in the ring held because the Kessler place fed 22 men better than any farm from here to the county line. He did not think about who kept it running. That was the thing about a machine. You only think about it when it stops. And Ada, at the far table, stood by the extra place she had set and did not stop. The dinner came to its middle. 22 men at the long tables under the cottonwood, the case separator gone quiet for the 1 hour of the one day that stops. The belt slack, the dust settling gold in the still air. Roy Kessler down one bench, Vera beside him, Irene moving with the bowls. 4 Grange officers eating with their hats pushed back. The children ranged along the end where children go, and Ada carrying the platters out, and back and out again, feeding the ring for the 481st time in 11 years. She had cooked 48 pounds of flour into bread and biscuit since 4 that morning. She had been up before the light to fire the range before the heat could win. She was 44 years old, and she had done this every threshing since 1923, and not one man at those tables had ever once said her name across them. Elias Vogt ate at Walter's elbow. He had asked for that too, though no one had marked it. He ate and he watched the yard the way he had watched it for 6 years, since the fever took Marta in 1928 and left his own front bedroom empty and his own table set for one. He was 51. He had come home from the war a quiet man and stayed one. He carried his own plate to the wash tub every year when the others left theirs, and last summer Ada had noticed it the way you notice weather, and thought nothing more. He set his fork down. He did it plainly. No scrape, no push of the bench, nothing to catch an eye. He just set the fork on the plate and put both hands flat on the oilcloth and looked down the table to where Ada stood with a platter going empty in her hands. Ada, he said. Just the name. But he said it loud enough to carry, and there was something under it that had not been in the yard all day. And the tables felt it before they understood it. A fork stopped. Then another. The talk fell off the way a field goes quiet before weather, all at once and from the edges in, and in 3 seconds the whole ring was still, and every face had turned, and Ada Kessler stood in the middle of a silence with her own name hanging in it, spoken by a man, across a table, in front of everyone. Walter half rose. It was reflex. The habit reached up through him the way it had reached up 480 times. The sentence already forming, she's needed, she wouldn't want, she's not looking to. And he got as far as the first push of his palms against the bench. Elias did not look at him. In 11 years, Elias said, I've watched you feed this ring 480 times, and I never once saw a man ask you to sit. Nobody moved. Vera's hand was at her mouth. A Grange officer had gone very still with a biscuit halfway to his plate. I've a house on the next section, Elias said, with nobody in it. 6 years now, and I'd sooner pay you in a front bedroom in your own name than in a plate of dinner. He turned his hat once on the oilcloth, slow, the only nervous thing about him. You can tell me no. I'll haul my own bundles home, and I'll never say it again. And I'll help thresh your brother's wheat next August, the same as this one. And it'll be forgot. But I'll not ask you at your brother's gate on a Tuesday, where somebody else can answer for you. And there it was, laid out plain in the still yard, the thing he had built. Because he had built a room. Any other day, any fence line, any quiet moment in the lane, and Walter's voice would have come first. She wouldn't want to. She's got the folks to see to. She's not one for leaving. That voice had answered every man who had ever come near her. The school teacher in 1925, gone home with she's got her people to mind. The seed man in 1930, sent off with she's not looking to go. Ada had let each one stand. She had let them stand because to cross Walter in his own house would cost her the pantry, and the pantry was the only place she had. But here, with 22 threshers and 4 Grange officers, and both her sisters-in-law, and the children all turned and waiting, with the whole ring's eyes on the man who had said her name, here Walter could not open his mouth. The habit reached for the sentence and found 22 men leaning in to hear a woman answer. And it could not. For the first time since 1923, the only person on the whole burnt earth permitted to say the word was Ada. Walter sat back down. You could watch it happen in his face. It was not the face of a man caught in a cruelty. That would have been easier. It was the face of a man measuring a room and finding it larger than he had known, and finding that he could not speak into it, and understanding in that same slow moment the size of what he had been doing every day for 11 years by filling a silence that was never his to fill. He looked at his sister as if seeing her from a long way off. His mouth was open a little. Nothing came. Irene stood at the end of the table with a bowl on her hip. She had asked, not an hour before, who the extra place was for, and had gotten no answer. She looked at it now. The plate. The fork. The glass of good sweet tea sweating in the heat at the empty end of the far table. And her face changed. Slow. The way frost goes off a window when the sun finds it. Ada did not answer. The silence held and grew heavy. And the old thing rose in her. Let it stand. Spare the house. It would cost so little to say nothing, to laugh it off, to set the platter down and pour the coffee, and let the men go back to their dinner, and let the whole thing sink into the ground, like the rain that never came. 11 years had taught her that saying nothing cost the least. 11 years had taught her to stop keeping an answer ready at all. Because an answer you keep ready is a thing that can be taken from your mouth. And she had gotten tired, somewhere in there, of things taken from her mouth. She looked at the extra place. She had set it that morning without knowing why. A plate, a fork, a glass of the good tea, at the empty end. And when Irene asked, she had found she had an answer, and could not yet say it, because she had the certainty and not the name. She had it now. She had had it since 10 minutes to noon, when the dust came gold off the road and his team turned in at her gate. The muscle that had gone soft for 11 years had gripped that morning over a fork. Just barely, just once. It was not soft now. But she did not answer at the table. She would not give it to them there, over the platters, in the middle of the serving, one more thing done between the bringing and the clearing. She had done everything else that way. Not this. Ada Kessler set the empty platter down. She picked up the full one. And she finished serving the dinner. Nobody breathed right. 22 men sat with their forks down and watched a woman carry the last of the meat down the long table, and set it where the reaching hands were, and refill the coffee, and take the biscuits round once more. And she did it steady, the way she had done it 480 times, her hands sure and her face quiet. She served the last man. She gathered the empty dishes from the near end. She scraped 2 plates into the scrape pot and stacked them the way she stacked them every ring day, tin on tin. And the small ordinary sound of it was the only sound in the yard. She wiped the oilcloth down where a boy had spilled. And then, in front of all of them, Ada untied her apron. She did it slow. She brought the strings round from behind and she worked the knot she tied every morning in the dark. And it came loose, and she lifted the loop over her head, and she folded the apron once, and again, into a clean square, and she laid it down on the bench. She did not throw it. She set it down the way you set down a thing you are finished with, but do not hate. Then she walked. The length of that yard is a thing the men who were there described for the rest of their lives, and none of them could ever say how long it took, because it took no time, and it took 11 years. She came out from behind the table where she had stood for 11 summers, and she walked the open ground between the 2 long tables, past the children, past Vera, with her hand still at her mouth, past Roy, past the Grange officers, past the idle bulk of the case separator with its belt gone slack in the heat. Her hands were empty. That was the thing they all marked. The empty hands. For 11 years, no one in that yard had seen Ada Kessler cross it with nothing in her hands. She had always been carrying. She carried nothing now. She passed her brother. Walter did not reach for her. He did not say her name or his sentence or anything at all. He sat with his hands on the oilcloth, and he watched his sister walk past him in her own yard, on the ground their father had left to her, and not to him, and he let her go, because there was nothing else left in the world for him to do, and some part of him, maybe, knew it was owed. She came to the head of the table where Elias Vogt stood. He had gotten to his feet. His hat was in his hand. He was not smiling, and neither was she, and there was nothing in either of their faces that a stranger would have called romance, and it was the most romantic thing any soul in that yard ever witnessed. 2 people passed the middle of their lives, standing a foot apart in the dust, with nobody speaking for them. Yes, Ada said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The yard was so quiet the cottonwood leaves could be heard. Yes, she said again, and I'll come tonight. For a moment nothing happened. The crew did not cheer. It was not that kind of thing, and they knew it. Then the oldest of the Grange officers, a man of 60-some with a white mustache, stood up from his bench. He did not say a word. He took off his hat. He held it against his chest. And then, down at the wash-tub end where the youngest hand sat, somebody knocked a tin cup once against the plank table. Then somebody else. Then the whole low end of it took it up, tin on wood, a slow steady knocking 22 men and 4 officers, thanking a woman at the exact tables where they had eaten from her hands 480 times and never once thanked her at all. It rolled up the yard like the first fat drops before a rain. It was the sound she had waited 11 years to hear and had stopped believing was a sound at all. Ada Kessler stood in it with her empty hands and let it come. The dinner broke up different than it began. Men went back to the machine because the wheat does not wait even for this, and the belt took up its roar again, and the dust rose. But something had turned in the yard that would not turn back. Walter worked the afternoon at the separator and did not speak. Elias worked beside him, and the 2 men fed bundles into the maw of the thing side by side and said nothing to each other. And there was nothing to say. By evening the Kessler wheat was in, such as it was, light and dear. Enough maybe for the note and maybe not. The crew ate a cold supper from the noon leavings and hitched their teams and rolled out down the lane one wagon after another in the long gold light. And every man of them tipped his hat to Ada as he went and said her name. Then the yard was empty, and the light went down, and the house stood quiet. Walter came to the pantry doorway after dark. He came with the lamp, and he stood in the door of the little room off the kitchen where his sister had slept for 11 years, and he looked at it maybe for the first time. The folding cot against the wall. The flour crate stamped Occident flour in red, where her 3 dresses lay folded. The shelf of 200 jars. The narrow window. It was a room for barrels and brooms, and it had been his sister's room since the 4th child came, and no one had ever once decided it out loud. It had only happened, across a series of reasonable afternoons, the way a field goes to a bank across a series of reasonable winters. He did not come to forbid her. That was new. In 11 years he had never once stood in a doorway with nothing to forbid. Ada, he said, and stopped. The name by itself, and no sentence after it, and he did not know how to go on, because he had never in his life had to. Ada was packing. She looked up at him from the cot where the crate stood open. "I'll not fight you for it," Walter said finally. "It came out rough. The house. I know Pa left it to you. I know that." He had never said it aloud. Since 1929, no one in that house had said it aloud, that the farm was Ada's on their father's will, that she was the one who stayed and nursed them both to the end and kept the place while her brothers married and went and came back and moved in. It had been true and unsaid for so long, it had stopped being true in any way that mattered. He said it now, in the dark, too late, and his voice broke on it a little. "It's yours. If you want us gone, we'll go. There's the note, but that's mine to carry. That's not." "Walter." She said it quiet, and he stopped. She folded her mother's good collar into the crate on top of the 3 dresses. "The farm's mine," she said. "Pa left it to me, and it's mine, and I'm leaving it to you." She said it plain, the way she said everything, no heat in it. "You and Irene and the children. I want the note paid off it if it can be, and I want the babies moved into the front bedroom. And I want you to keep the place, and work it, and let it come down to your boys after. I'm not taking the house, Walter, I never was. I'm only taking myself." He stood in the doorway with the lamp and did not answer, and this time it was Walter who had no words ready, and for once in 11 years the silence in that kitchen belonged to him and not to her. He looked at the cot. He looked at the flour crate with his sister's whole life folding down into it, and you could see the arithmetic land on him, slow and total, the way it had landed at the table at noon, but heavier now, in the dark, with no crew to perform for and no habit to hide behind. 480 dinners. 11 years. 200 jars a summer. The account she kept that nobody asked her to keep. A woman who owned the ground he stood on and had slept in his pantry and fed his ring and answered to the cook and had just handed him the whole of it, paid, with the babies in the good room, and taken nothing but a flour crate and herself. There is no cruelty you can do to a man worse than the sum he does to himself. Walter Kessler stood in that doorway and totted it up. And it was the largest number he had ever held, and it was a gift, and that was the punishment. He set the lamp down on the shelf so she would have the light to pack by. It was the only thing he could think to give her that she had not already given him. "Good night, Ada," he said. "Good night, Walter." He went. And Ada packed her life by lamplight in the room off her own kitchen. She did it the way she did everything, with care and no waste. 3 dresses, her mother's good collar, the account ledger in her school hand, the one nobody had asked her to keep, 11 years of what the farm took in and paid out, written small and true, a ball jar of seed corn saved from a better year, her father's spectacles folded that she had kept in a handkerchief since he died, and last, from her apron pocket where she had slipped it that afternoon, the extra fork. The one from the place she had set at noon at the empty end of the far table, for a man she would not let herself name, before she had the name and after she had the certainty. She laid it in the crate on top of everything, the fork from the place she set, before she knew she was setting it for herself. One Occident flour crate held 11 years. She carried it out to the wagon herself in the dark. She did not let Elias come in for it, though he had driven back over and was waiting in the yard with his hat in his hand. She carried it out the same way she had carried the cot in, alone, so that no one would have to. She set it in the bed of his wagon. Then she climbed up beside him, 44 years old, and he clucked to the horses, and they went down the lane between the burnt fields under a sky thick with stars, and she did not look back at the house, because it was not hers to look back at anymore, and had never been the thing she wanted. The pantry stood empty behind her, the cot folded against the flour bins, the lamp burning where Walter had left it. 6 months on, it was February, and the frost lay hard on Barton County. On the Kessler place, the pantry was a pantry again. The cot stood folded against the bins where nobody slept. Irene cooked now. She had learned it across the summer and fall, the range and the jars and the feeding of men, and she had learned too what it took, which she had never once counted before. She counted the hours now. She counted them because she was the one spending them, up before the light to fire the range before the heat or the cold could win. And there is no teacher like the work itself. She did not complain of it. But she had grown quiet in a way she had not been, and sometimes at the stove she would look at the empty pantry door and think of 11 years and say nothing, because there was nothing to say that would not be too small. And on the next section over, in a house that had stood empty 6 years, a woman woke in a front bedroom with 2 windows. Ada Vogt woke in the gray before the light out of the long habit of it, and lay still a moment, and remembered that she did not have to rise. The room was cold and clean, and it was hers. 2 windows, east and south. Her name was on the mailbox at the end of the lane, painted by Elias in the fall in careful white letters, Vogt, and under it, because she asked him to, and he did it without a word. Both their given names. On the porch, the Occident flour crate had become a seed box, and in it, under the February frost, narcissus bulbs waited for spring that she had put down herself in October. She rose when she was ready. She made the coffee for 2. At Christmas, she had seen Walter, once, across the line fence between the sections, both of them out seeing to stock in the cold. They had stood a moment with the wire between them and the breath smoking off the horses. He had asked, awkward, how she kept. She said she kept well. There was a silence, and in it 11 years stood up between them plain as the fence posts, and Ada looked at her brother across the wire and said the only thing she ever said to him about any of it, once, and never again. "You always said I wouldn't want to," she said. "You never asked." Walter took it. He did not argue it. He nodded, slow, a man who had done his arithmetic and would be doing it the rest of his life, and he tipped his hat to his sister across the fence and went on to his stock and she to hers. And that is the whole of it. A man who farmed the next section watched a woman get answered for 480 times and understood the one thing her own family never had, which was that no one had ever asked her to sit down. And when he went to ask her the only question that mattered, he did not ask it at the gate, or in the lane, or anywhere her brother's voice could reach it first. He asked her in front of the whole threshing crew, 22 men and 4 Grange officers and both her sisters-in-law, at 10 minutes past noon on the one day that stops. Not to shame anybody. Not for a show. He asked her there because it was the only room in the county where her brother could not answer for her. It was the only place on earth where the word would have to be hers. And it was. She had cooked for that crew 480 times, and no one had ever once asked her to sit down. So a man built her a table of her own, and a room with 2 windows, and a mailbox with her name on it. And an old woman down some road tonight knows exactly what that's worth, because she's been standing at her own stove, eating from the scrape pot, longer than she'd care to say. If you're watching this, and you know a woman like Ada, one who does everything and gets answered for, tell me where you are. Comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far Ada's story travels.